So I think where I want to start across about Conway's law is, how many times when we try to think about product design, what gonna be the product structure, how much importance we give to the team interactions, the org design, and also the interaction patterns between the teams. What are the communication channels, how they are placed, and all that. At least to my understanding, we don't give it a lot of importance. And I can take, my personal experience, and I've also talked to certain people. So it clearly comes out, right? Like when we are thinking across how our product is gonna be structured, how what it gonna be look like, what it's gonna be, as simple as a website and other thing, we don't even think how the organization is related to it. That's where this Conway law comes into the picture. It's not more of a conformity law where it is right or wrong. It is more of a descriptive observation, and I'll also talk about my experience that we are facing these days. So it clearly says, how your communication channels, how your team is structured. It clearly reflects across into your product design, your product architecture, and how your product is built in. So just think it across. Nobody in today's world want to be a monolith, but they don't realize, their team structure itself is built in a way that there is a boundary, there is no communication, and they still don't have any liberty. So that's one way to look at it. If you really see, as I said, that this is not right or wrong kind of setup, there's also an inverse Conway maneuver that we always talk about, which is all about, if you really want to get to a way that how your product should look like, it's always good to see how your team is structured. It's more across. You have figured out a product, you are late in the game, you see, okay, this is my best way to put in the product and the system design and everything. Now go about and change your team structures and their communication channels, and that's pretty much the problem that we are trying to solve in our day to day, at least the current setup that we are. I'll give you this elaborated view. What we are trying to do. So this is a payment company. We've been working with them for long 5 years and all, right? So, and it's a microservices architecture. So we already have an agreement, and we just think it from a perspective. There are multiple partners, third parties, and then we also sit in one of the parts of it. And that's where what we were doing is, building the product from scratch, wherein we achieved a good amount of things as an outcome in last few years, which is more about getting your first slice of value, rolling out in the markets, having the transactions, and also getting some good feedback, a lot of customers, a lot of outcomes, and all that. Now, this company, now goes to the next level of growth, as we call in hyper growth, or in your terms, where a lot of takeovers happened, and it is an industry which is innovating very rapidly. Take the payment industry in last 5 years. So from that perspective, it becomes a necessity for them that they need to scale, they need to evolve, they need to get to the newer markets, they need to get to the newer value propositions onto the platform. So it becomes inevitable that we really have to get to that state where this evolves at a rapid pace, that what we have been doing. Now what we realize is this the team, how we were structured, it was a feature driven team, right? And then we realized that it worked pretty well until a certain period. When I say certain period, up to a team size of 30 to 40 people, it was working pretty well. We were able to churn out things, we were able to align to the business objectives and everything. But what we saw is, as the system has now expanded, both from a architecture side, exposure side, criticality side, it is really a challenge on the ground to grow ourselves, right? How we build, how we evolve, how we release, and how we do all those discoveries and other stuff. So that's where some of the fundamental points that we really saw was, even if you have to onboard someone new onto the this platform, it's a long gestation period. And one of the reasons is the bigger landscape of it. So I'll give you an example where the expectation was 40 plus microservices you need to know. Just imagine how much time a person would take to get that. So somewhere, even the people who were there, they were there thinking more from a tactical standpoint, where the feature gets out and I'm good for the day, right? But if you really see, This is not a sustainable setup if we talk about a longer horizon of things. That's where the inverse Conway maneuver we have been utilizing, which where what we are trying to do here is our microservices architecture or the design of the product should be reflected back into how our team is structured and how their communication is. So what we are trying to do is, you must have heard about domain driven bounded context. That is what we are trying to build in, where each of these different teams are segregated basis a bounded context and have a clear communication channels. So what it helps across is, the biggest change, problem was onboarding. Now rather than knowing a 40 plus microservices, we're just bound to know 6 to 8, just giving you an example. It also gives us a more chance to get to the faster to the market, evolve and reach the outcome that this platform is looking across. So a clear cut example how Conway and inverse Conway can come into the picture. And I've seen it very relatable. The only pitfall of this is it just takes across the communication into the aspect. It doesn't takes across leadership, what your culture is, what kind of organization landscape you have, what stage of the growth you would be there. So all these are missing elements. But if you really see a lot of the important elements you can utilize in day-to-day lives when you talk about your team structures, team topologies. And as a product manager, I really feel we should start giving more importance to these things that we have been doing earlier. I'm happy to hear other thoughts on the ground, around any encounters, any thoughts around this.
No, that makes a lot of sense. So I'll tell you what, the simplest form, because if we create smaller distributed teams, we want them to have their independent lifeline and all the teams have to be productive, which means that we need to reduce dependencies in those teams. They have to function by themselves. That kind of mandates you to create a loosely coupled architecture, and that is how software also gets built. And today, as we know, it is modular and more microservices, etc. In the previous days, it was not microservices, it was more loosely coupled architecture where you would create modules separately and hand it out. But let me tell you something, this function versus feature that you mentioned, right? I don't think it is easy to create feature teams. It needs training, not even the Agile Scrum Master himself first needs to understand and learn how to work with feature teams. The product manager needs to know how to design a product which is a full stack feature. Because I can tell you, when they create distributed teams, one team is doing engines, one team is doing databases, one team is doing services, and one team is doing UI, right? And then they are still dependent on each other, which is a mess. And it is not hard. You just have to learn it. It is really not that hard. You have to just learn it, and you have to create more feature full stack teams, which will give you more throughput and more results. Something demoable at the end of every sprint, especially if you can align those teams. Wonderful, nothing like it. And it's pretty much doable, really. There are a lot of topologies that we have seen. Twitter doing it for some amount of time. Then I think even Slack had it. And the browser stack had it. So all these companies have demonstrated success with scaled agile small distributed team, which has translated into good software architectures also. So yeah, hats off to Conway for noticing that.
So what happens when there are misaligned teams in a Conway law situation? Manish?
Coming up with the realization that we've had with the Conway's law, Amir and Mohit, they both spoke about kind of feature teams or building self-sufficiency between a single team and enabling them to kind of deliver things end to end, and having many such teams, smaller teams rather than having large scale teams. And I think I'm completely in agreement to that. I would like to take that philosophy one step ahead, and something that I've kind of been pondering over. I will be honest, I've not gotten a chance to actually experiment this in a real life project, but I have kind of want to do this at some point in time, which is metric based teams. All right. So, and what I mean by that is that instead of building a team that delivers a feature which is good, an even better way of building an organization or building product teams would be teams in charge of achieving outcomes. And it is and yes, sometimes an outcome might be too big. So in that case, you kind of learn something from by working with Chris Matz. You can build that metrics hierarchy and identify a product owner to be responsible for a particular metric that he or she would be kind of achieving. And that would be the responsibility of that team to help that product move against that metric and building the end-to-end team that will help move those metrics. And I think that would be a great way for us to be able to have more nimble, more outcome-oriented teams that are not just delivering features, but they're actually
Right.
delivering outcomes and they're actually moving metrics. And that's something that I want to try and experiment with some team at some point in time. But yeah, that's how I would say that, with the wonderful realization that we have from the Conway's law, we need to come up with ideas and experiments on how best to integrate it and see the impact of that onto our software and also onto the product. Yeah.